Hello students, hope you're all doing well. In our previous session, that's in my previous video, I had discussed about certain topics or certain concepts related to module 1. Now this video is also going to be a continuation of that, where we are going to start up with a new topic of module 1, that is models of HRM. Okay, so here we'll be discussing about four major, very important and significant models of HRM, like the Fombrun, Tichy and Devana model, the Harvard model, the Guest model and the Warwick model. Okay, let us discuss each of these models in detail. The first one is Fombrun, Tichy and Devana model. Now according to this model, they say that a company or an organization, in order to be or to measure the effectiveness of a company, we need to understand that there are certain factors or functions which have to be mutually taking place in a very cohesive and coordinative manner. Only then you will be able to achieve the effectiveness, the overall outcome of the company. So those four factors or functions are going to be very important and essential components of human resource management for that particular company under study. Okay. Now going by the history or the explanation for this particular model, this model was first developed in the year 1984. Okay. According to this model, it also says that out of these, including the all the four functions, each and every function has to be interlinked, interrelated and mutually functioning. Only then you will be able to find the success. Here is nothing but a measure of the organization's effectiveness. Okay, so here we need to know that if there is a problem or if there is a disconnect between any of these four functions, it can have a very big impact on the overall company's success rate. Okay, so that is how we try to understand here. And one more thing is that, see, this model is probably one of the oldest model, and we know that usually whenever a new concept has been established, that concept can be challenged by new another few more new innovative concepts which are going to come in the future, isn't it? So the new innovative concepts which are going to come are basically going to be an upgraded and updated version of the existing concept or the previous concept, isn't it? So similarly, this particular model, which was one of the oldest models, has a lot of issues. How? See, this model is incomplete as it focuses on only the four functions, whereas it completely negates or does not include the other various functions which are very important for a company, right? For example, it's not at all discussing or including the external environmental variables, number one. Number two, it is not at all discussing about situational factors or contingency factors, uncertainty factors, right? So if these such major factors are not being included in the model, can this model be a workable model in today's context? Definitely not, right? Correct, right? So here, even before I complete explaining this, let me give you the brief note on each of these four functions. Okay, the first is called as selection. So as we all know, selection is nothing but a systematic process whereby after screening and conducting the interview and going through the various kinds of tests and checks like aptitude tests, group discussion sessions and face-to-face interviews and so on, so the employees, after going through all of these activities and processes, if they get a better score compared to the rest who have been in that particular process, those people will get selected for the job which is kept vacant in the company. Okay, the second is appraisal. Appraisal is nothing but, again, a process whereby we try to systematically evaluate the performance outcomes of the employees on the basis of certain key parameters or criterias. Okay, after making the assessment, we will come up with the scores. Okay, now based on these scores, you will get to know which employee is performing extremely well and which employee is performing moderately well and which employee is performing much poorer, right? So this kind of a categorization can take place if and only if you go for appraisal. Appraisal is nothing but the process of systematically evaluating the performance outcomes of the employees, keeping in mind the pre-established standards of work performance with that of the actual work performance which is achieved by the employees. Okay. The next is human resource development. Now here, if you find out that the employees, like say for example, after appraising and evaluating the performance, you will come to a conclusion, or you will get to know that there are some employees who have not excelled their performance. Probably it is those employees who need some support, help in the form of training and development, right? So here HRD, human resource development, is all about finding what the gap is between the actual performance of the employee with respect to what is expected or desired by the management of the company. And in order to bridge or fill this gap, they come up with various kinds of training and developmental programs, initiatives, actions, activities, and also campaigns. All of those things together is what becomes your HRD. Okay. And the next is going to be rewards. Rewards is nothing but the final return that the employee gets for the result that he has achieved in terms of productivity achieved, in terms of output, in terms of service rendered to the company. Okay. So all of these four major functions have to be mutually interdependent to one another. They need to be interrelated to one another. Only when this kind of interrelatedness takes place, you will be in a position to measure the overall effectiveness of the organization. Now that is what is being evidently understood with the help of the first model, that is Formbren, Tichy and Devanna model. Okay, students, you've understood this, right? And make sure you need to draw the model. For all four models, we will have a diagram. You have to draw this in your exam and explain it. Fine. And then we go to the second model, that is the Harvard model. Now, in this model, we will have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 elements. Okay. See, I'll tell you how it is 6. First, you have this one. See here. Stakeholder interest is one component or one element. Second, HRM policy. Third, HRM outcomes. Fourth, long-term consequences. Fifth, situational factors. Then what is the sixth? Sixth is not mentioned here, but it is self-understood. See, you have these dotted lines here, right? Going backwards. See, in the reverse form, going backwards. Again here, going backwards. This dotted line represents feedback. Okay, you see it is mentioned here, and a feedback loop. Okay, so that is what is going to be the sixth component. So totally in your exam, when you're explaining this particular model, you will have to write down all the 6 components which are going to be critical and important for HRM activity in the company. Okay, so now we will start explaining this particular model. So here, this model is like, say, a further extension of the previous model. What was not seen or observed in the previous model was probably stretched and given more importance, and that is what is being seen in this particular model. Okay, so here the dimensions are given here, and we know that every single element here is again going to be interrelated and interconnected to the every other element or component here. Okay, now let me explain each of these elements one by one. First is shareholder interest. Now, what do we mean by shareholder interest? Stakeholder interest. Stakeholders, first of all, are basically people who have a say or a stake in the company in which they have invested. Okay, okay, which means company, any company for that matter, it cannot stay in isolation, right? So all the companies have to better understand the needs, desires, interests, and likes of its stakeholders, and accordingly try to tailor make its activities and processes. Thereby, it is able to maintain a very good, rapport or an understanding between itself and that of its stakeholders. So when I say stakeholders, they predominantly include these people: shareholders of the company, those people who have subscribed to the shares which has been offered by the company to the general public, and they occupy the position of a shareholder. right? We all know, right? Shareholders are basically categorized into two types: equity shareholders and preference shareholders. Always preference shareholders have the preferential right over the payment of dividends, which is to be given to them, which happens as a form of profit sharing of the company to the employees. And the second is going to be the management of the company. We know what is management. We're talking about the topmost layer or the cream layer of the organizational hierarchy. Next, employee groups or the employees, workers. Then government. Government is going to be a very important element, because the government is going to be one of the prime authorities and bodies who are going to make a lot of rules and regulations, which are going to regulate and control the activities to be performed by these companies. And then we're definitely going to not leave this stakeholder, which is the society at large or the community, where we're talking about your community welfare activities, taking care of the weaker sections of the society, construction of public toilets, construction of public parks, providing stationery items for children of the who come from the rural background or who are studying in the government schools. These kind of and even construction of drainage, providing housing facilities, providing clothes, providing basic security. All these kind of facilities and activities are basically taken care of when we talk about the last stakeholder, that is the community at large. Apart from that, community can also include your customer, your distributor, vendor, supplier, marketer, commission agent, and many more people who actively participate with you in the market. And also beyond market, that is your community welfare programs and practices, right? And then we go to the next one, that is HRM policies. Now, HRM policies is nothing but the various procedures and policies which are being made by the company, which will be kept in effect in order to make sure that all the activities are being done in a particular pattern, which is mostly expected by the management of the company. Okay. So what are the various HRM policies? Here, employees influence. Employees influence is nothing but, you need to understand that there are two sides to this. Number one is, you should have the capacity to influence the intentions of your employees and cohesively benefit them as a systematic process by taking their views and perspective and accordingly collaborating and then trying to put forward your views as management of the company. The second is human resource flow. Human resource flow is nothing but, we're talking about the requirement of people. What should be the inflow and outflow of human resources, which is required in order to facilitate the day-to-day operations and activities of the company. And then reward system or mechanism is something wherein we're talking about what are the various kinds and types of rewards that has to be given to the employees for the contribution or service rendered by these employees. And then we are talking about work systems, which is nothing but the various kinds of work practices, work models, which is being kept in or say practice in a company, which has to be understood and effectively implemented so that you are able to make sure that you are able to make the best and judicious use of available human resources of the company, keeping in mind the cost consideration and also the structure that is in place and also the targets that have to be met on time. Then the next third element or component is going to be HRM outcomes. So what is going to be the outcome, the final outcome that you're going to expect? Number one is going to be, you must have higher levels of commitment of the management towards the needs and expectations and desires of the employees, commitment of these human resources towards the goals that has been given to the or which is being deployed by the management of the company to the employees. Second, they must be competent. There should be competency. Competency is defined as the way in which you shape yourself, keeping in mind the skill set required, the experience, expertise, and exposure required for you to take up certain tasks and effectively handle, administer, manage, and complete it. Okay, that is what we include or explain about competency or competence. Congruence is nothing but, you must make sure that everything takes place in a particular manner. We say it as congruence. Congruence means in a much more composed way, you should be able to do it. So congruence majorly has to do with that affiliation, that connectedness, that rapport, that interrelatedness, and that collaboration of thoughts, ideologies, practices, which should take place only then you will be able to reach at a particular desired outcome. And this also, it can also include the combined efforts of people, right? Congruent, okay, as a system. Then cost effectiveness is nothing but making sure that you need to identify the best ways and mechanisms and practices, so that you keep in mind that you shouldn't overburden the company's cost to company element, CTC. You must find the best alternative methods of doing a particular task and executing them effectively, such that you are able to bring down the cost burden for the company, so that whatever becomes that cost saving that you do because of this kind of an exercise, that amount of money will be judiciously used for some other productive purposes in the company. Okay. And then we go to the next component, that is long-term consequences. So here we are looking at what can be the long run effect of whatever you do in these stages here. Okay. So what are the long-term consequences? We need to make sure that there is individual well-being, welfare kept at high levels in the company. Organizational effectiveness is something that we see as an outcome. If you see, the same organizational effectiveness was the final outcome in the previous model. Similarly, that is also being used here, that you should be in a position to measure or say that the company is effective enough to handle its operations well, and it also has the ability to be more effective by coming out with good results, which is expected by the management of the company. And finally, you're looking at the social well-being or the societal well-being, which is purely to do with your involvement in taking care of the society where you have your stay as an organization or a company. Fine. And then we also have one more factor or component, that is situational factors. Situational factors are basically factors which are to do with the situational context. We call them as contingency factors. We call them as factors which cannot be controlled, but you need to adjust and accommodate according to the changes taking place in these situations, which are highly uncontrollable and extraneous to a company. Fine. So let us see what are those factors. Number one, workforce characteristics. See, if you remember, we have discussed a lot of concepts, psychological concepts in our previous subject in the previous semester, that is MOB, management and organizational behavior, where we have discussed about a lot of things which has to do with how people react, interact, behave, how they pretend, how they want to showcase themselves, and so on. So the first and very important situational factor is workforce characteristics, which is nothing but the behavioral dynamics and intentions and actions of people, which cannot be expected unless and until you master the art of understanding people and their psychology, right? So you need to accordingly take initiatives and actions, so that you don't you don't irk or you don't trigger them to cause chaos and confusion in the company, and you must be having the capacity to control their behaviors also. Then the next is business strategy and conditions, which is nothing but strategies cannot be very stagnant or very static. Strategies that we make today should be very flexible, keeping in mind that you should have the capacity to include something new into the existing strategy or remove something from the strategy which you feel will not work, right? So look at the conditions of the environment in the external world. Accordingly, try to imbibe certain layers of changes in the existing strategy, so that you will be able to better find success in the long run. You will be able to bring about sustainability in your operations, right? Next is management philosophy. Now, management philosophies, there have been a lot of philosophies, there have been a lot of standard set. Sometimes you need to know that you cannot stick on to the same old philosophy. You need to experiment with new philosophies of management, accordingly bring about changes, and then execute your tasks, right? Labor markets is nothing but we're talking about the labor conditions. We're talking about supply and demand conditions. We're talking about how much of supply do we have in our country in terms of labor availability. Okay. Are we rich? Are we surplus? Or are we deficit in labor resources? What are the expectations of these labor markets? What is that the labor market wants and expects from the companies and organizations? All of these things are going to have an impact on your activities, right? And then We are talking about trade unions. We know that trade unionism is something which is very, very obvious, which is in place in a country like India as well as foreign countries from a very long period of time. We will also be discussing about this trade unions in detail when we discuss about the various, when you discuss about the evolution of HRM, which is going to come in the same module. Okay. Then tasks, technology. Here, tasks, technology. Here we refer to that technology and technology related activities and services keep changing according to the competition levels that is taking place in the market. See, no more we are going to operate in isolation. No more we are going to operate in just one particular defined geographical area. Companies go for outsourcing kind of activities wherein anybody who's excellent or who has that core competency in doing a particular task, such task will be done, or we acquire such tasks and services from those companies which are extremely doing well in such areas. So you need to know that technology helps you to easily move and shift skill set and abilities, which is going to be very, very important. Apart from that, we will also have to talk about the various kinds of software applications that are being developed by a lot of companies which are going to replace manual labor with automation, artificial intelligence, and machine labor, right? And then laws and societal values, obviously, yes, the rules, the land laws, the legal framework, the statutory bodies, the various kinds of acts and sections which are being passed in the parliament, which are related to your company and your workforce, have to be abided by. If not, you will have to face the legal consequences. And societal values, this should be mostly voluntary, but some companies, they don't take it up as a voluntary initiative, and that is the reason government says that you need to do this in the form of making some rules and regulations, right? So here societal values is nothing but taking care of the people who need some extra help. Societal or social well-being, all of these things can be included under societal values, like CSR initiatives, that is corporate social responsibility, corporate citizenship initiatives, or taking care of people who are in need of some facilities and amenities. All of these basic things can actually be included under situational. According to the situational factors, you need to always operate, okay, and accordingly adjust your mode of operation also. So one more thing which I can say under societal value is that sometimes there are these basic and fundamental principles, values, ethics, ethical standards, norms, expectations, behaviors, cultural cues. All these things also should be given, you need to give importance to it. You need to abide by it and only then conduct your business. If not, you will have a problem in the long run. Fine. So this is what has been explained in this particular model. Now, specifically speaking, if you see, every single element is dependent on every other element. And see, you need to, in order to find success, you need to make sure that stakeholder interest, situational factors, policies, outcomes, all of these are synchronized and aligned. Only then you will be able to reach out at the long-term consequences. Okay. And the consequence which occur gives you the feedback regarding how effective you were in selecting and using the various choices which are being made available in the form of various other components. Okay. The next model is to do with the guest model. So here, of course, students, see, here you have the explanation, but I'm just going to explain it with the help of the model. This part you can go through it slowly also. Okay. So if you look at this here, this particular model consists of several components again. So here it starts from HRM strategy, ends at financial outcomes. Okay. So I think, I mean, as we are, explaining these concepts, these models, almost every model has this concept of what goes in and what comes out, isn't it? So what is the means and what is the ends? What are the ways in which you achieve a desired outcome? Correct? So similarly, this model also has a sequence of activities or components. First is we talk about human resource management strategy, which is nothing but the strategy which is being crafted and made in order to effectively manage human resources of a company, which can start and end from any point to any point within the company limits. The second component is HRM practices, wherein the strategy should be framed in such a way that it provides scope for it to include all these elements, or in other ways, if you want the company to achieve good returns or outcome in the long run as the end result, you must make sure that the major activities that takes place in the company should be aligned with the strategy which is already made by the company's higher ups. Okay, so first element we talk about here after the strategy is HRM practices, wherein we are going to talk about hiring, training, appraisal, compensation, and the, compensation and industrial relations, the relationship between employer, employee, and the organization. Then HR outcome like commitment, quality, flexibility. These are all going to be very important indicators which make sure that you are able to reach out to the outcomes expected by the management of the company. Behavioral outcomes is nothing but we need to know that there is a particular type or extent of behavior which will be appreciated, acknowledged, and accepted by the company, right? Now this behavioral outcomes is majorly to do with conditioned behavior and standard behavior and expected and desired behavior of the by the company's management. Any small deviations from this type of behavior shall be will have negative consequences, wherein people may not accept you, they may not look up to you as an employee, they may not recognize your talent or the contribution made because you are not fitting in the culture that is in place in the company, right? So what are the various outcomes here? Motivation, you must be motivated. Cooperation with various aspects and activities and people. Organizational citizenship is very very important, wherein as we all are citizens, even companies also are citizens, right? So as an organization, what is it that you need to do now to run the show? How you do it? How you handle and administer the employees? What kind of training and what kind of conditioning happens? All of these things are being used as regulatory measures to control and validate the organizational citizenship element or component of the company. Okay, and the next is performance outcome. Here we are looking at what is it that we want you to give as an outcome in terms of your performance or productivity measures. Number one, it should be positive, it shouldn't be negative. You must be very very productive, you must be innovative in your approach and your ways of doing things, and there should be quality output and not just the quantity that matters. It's not just producing 10 10 or 100 units. It's about how many of these units are quality oriented or are matching the quality standards prescribed by the management or the R&D section. Okay, and then you must make sure that you shouldn't have negative performance outcome. It should always be positive. And then turnover, you must make sure that there should be any turnover rates. What is the turnover? Number of people who leave the organization on XYZ reasons, on various parameters and various reasons, right? So such things always have to be taken care of and curbed, because the more number of employee turnover takes place, it has a negative impact on a very bad impact on the overall performance outcomes of the company. And then the last is financial outcome, which is nothing but what you expect as a result of all of these activities that takes place, which is going to be profits that you make for the company through sales proceeds and exports and many more outsourcing activities, and return on investment. That is nothing but if the company is spending X rupees on training you or giving you salary or giving you some kind of a reward program and a campaign that is taken for the upliftment of skill set of the employees, there should be something which the company should get in return in the form of business opportunity, in the form of sales proceeds, in the form of reaching out very good profit scale and profit margins and so on. So, and that is what is going to be ROI measure, right? So the guest model is going to be a connected model of several elements which has to synchronize well with the strategy which is in place, and accordingly if you do it, only then you'll be able to reach the desired financial outcome. So students, if you see here this particular model, I've just given you the detailed explanation. This model, just to give you the basics here again, it was developed by David Guest in the year 1997. Here, this particular person feels that this model is much more detailed and much more practical in its orientation compared to the previous models. Okay, and many more things have to be included here, because the outcomes here are basically talking about behavioral, performance, and financial rewards. So these are all things which are going to tell you that without a consequence, there is no action or behavior taking place, isn't it? Again, going back to what we've discussed in the previous subject, right? So all of these things are being explained here. You need to go through this. If you have any doubts, let me know, students. Okay. Now we'll go to the next model, that is the Warwick model. Again here, this model was developed by two researchers. Okay. Henry and Pettigrew of University of Warwick. Hence, they termed it as Warwick model. Like other human resource models, the difference between other and this is that the focus and the perspective is quite different from what has happened in the previous models, right? So let us see what are the major components or elements of this model. It includes outer context, that is macro environmental factors and forces. The second is inner context, that is firm specific or micro environmental factors. Third is going to be business strategy content. Fourth, HRM context. And fifth is HRM content. Okay. So here, let us see how the model can be explained. Let me tell you students, all these models are important. You need to draw this model and explain them. Okay. Yeah. So what is this outer context? Outer context is nothing but we are looking at the major factors which are there in the external environment which can have an impact on the company's success ratio in the long run. So what are these factors? It includes socio-economic factors, technical or technological factors, political and legal environmental factors, and competition. So these are some of the major factors and elements which can have an impact on the company and its activities and decisions, because these are external factors which are highly uncontrollable, and you need to know how to effectively handle, administer, and make sure that you are actively participating with the elements of those models, right, of that particular areas. Okay. And then we go to the next one, that is inner context. Yeah, that includes basically what the factors which you can probably find out or identify within the company's limits, control limits. Okay. Like the culture that is practiced, that is organization culture, the organization structure which is there in place, politics, power, and leadership effectiveness in the company, task and technology, and business outputs. All these factors are going to be elements which are in the innermost layers of the company, which is nothing but something which is within the control limits of the company, and which the company can actually have a control and regulate it also according to the requirements and expectations from the markets. The next is business strategy context, where we are talking about the strategies that the companies use in order to find success. Okay. What are those elements here? We are talking about the objectives. See, without having a purpose, goal, or an objective, you cannot have a strategy. And every strategy we do is related to achievement of certain well-stated pre-objectives, right? And then you need to understand the product markets, wherein you're talking about what is that the market wants and expects from you, which is nothing but the needs and expectations of people. Accordingly, you need to make certain products and services, tailor make them to match the requirements, and then give it to the ultimate buyers. This is what is going to be important. And what is the strategy that we are going to use to do this transformation activity more effectively. Okay. And then you need to understand the various kinds of other strategies and tactics which has to be used and exercised in order to make sure that you're able to convert every market into a segment of market opportunity, so that you can take that for your advantage and take leverage of the situation and convert that into a very good business platform or an avenue where you can make more money from this particular choice. Okay. And then the next element is going to be HRM context, that is here. So here HRM context, here we refer to the various roles which are being allotted and played by various key people in the organization, the definition of the context or the atmosphere within which the scope or the area within which all of these activities take place, the organization and the other components of the organization, which is going to be again explained and understood, and what is going to be the expected HR outputs in terms of the goals that we're going to achieve. So HRM includes role of HRM, definition of the scope of HRM, organization and the other connected variables, and final outputs that we are going to expect or that we are going to achieve. Okay. And the last component is going to be HRM content, which is nothing but HR flow, which is nothing but the flow of activities that takes place with the people who are given a particular role and task. Second is going to be work system, reward systems. Reward system is purely to do with allotment of assignments and tasks for these people based on work assignments and the role that they or the position that they hold. And then reward system is basically to do with what kind of reward system is being practiced in the company to accordingly give them what they need to be given, which is going to be a part of what the policy of the company holds as well. And then finally the relationship between employees and employers. What kind of relationship and rapport takes place in the company? How are we going to handle this, and how is it going to give you good returns in the long run? If you see, this particular model again has connectedness. So outer is connected to inter, and that is further connected to the strategy and the context, and then finally the content. And each of these elements are mutually connected, cohesive, interrelated, and we need to know that every single component is essential because each of these components have a certain strategic and specific focus. And when you don't try to give importance to these components, it can have a very bad impact in the company or in that particular domain in the long run. So you need to know that this particular model is much more sophisticated and much more in detail, which gives us overall picture of how HRM takes place or has to take place in any given organization. Okay, and then by students, by this we are done with the models of HRM. The next topic is related to HRM in India and global context. That is, see, in this topic we will be discussing about the various the evolution, the history, the growth, and then the trends, and how human resource management takes place in India in comparison to how it is being practiced in the global context. Okay, and students, what I have done is I have actually attached a PDF document along with this video. I will be giving you a PDF document. You can go through it and study. It's a very simple topic. It's very generic also. If in case you have any doubts, you can let me know. Fine. So you need to be going through this topic, which I'll be giving it to you in a PDF document. Go through it. It's simple to understand. If you still have some confusion, you can get back to me. Okay. Then next topic is going to be evolution of human resource management. So here we will be discussing about how HRM actually took its birth, not only in the Indian context, but the global context. Okay, the overall global context. Okay, so in order to make your understanding and your study job easy, I have converted this in the form of certain eras and certain points which you can study and accordingly prepare for your exam. Okay, so the first is Industrial Revolution took place. After that, it gave birth to trade unionism, and then we come up with different eras. Okay, like social responsibility era, scientific management era, human relations era, behavioral science era, systems approach era, and finally contingency approach era. By going through all of these points, we get to understand the phases of evolution and development of the subject human resource management. Okay, let us start with the session. First one, Industrial Revolution. So here, if you see, this concept of Industrial Revolution actually took place in the year 1850s in Western Europe and USA. Okay, and gradually that concept was also being adopted, or it had the beginning in the 20th century in our country, India. Okay, so what was that which you could see or find as a change that took place post Industrial Revolution? Okay, first is machines were brought in, which means we could find out that new innovative machineries and equipments were brought in order to support the production activity of the company. Okay, wherein you are just going to do facilitation kind of a activity in order to support the manual labor with the help of machines. Okay, technology made rapid progress, which is nothing but latest technology for those years. I mean to say latest technology, not now. For that year, when we're talking about 1850s and then later on 20th century, that time we know that majority of the production activities were taking place with the help of basic component assessments, alignments, and also with the help of abundant manual labor. Okay, but all thanks to this particular concept which took place, we had a lot of technology support systems which came into existence. With the help of that, we were able to make a lot of progress in terms of maximizing our production capacity, increasing the time of delivery, increasing the scale of operations, and so on. The next is workers were treated like machine tools, which is going to be a very sad element, because You never looked at the organic or the humane approach. You never had that humane approach towards the employees. We were just looking at them as agents of output, and that is what happened. And then employers were keen to meet production targets rather than satisfying the requirements of the workers. Again, unfortunate situation. And then government did very little to protect the interest of workers. Probably the full-fledged focus was only on productivity, production, outcome, sales, money. Nothing was much done towards the benefits that you need to do for the betterment of the employees or workforce, right? The next phase or the next stage of evolution is trade unionism. So here in this particular concept, actually what happened was, whatever was the flaw in the previous phase of evolution was taken up as a corrective measure in this particular phase, where voluntary association called as trade unionism or trade unions was established after the Trade Union Act of 1926 was officially and legally passed in the Parliament of India. Okay, so here this particular period where state intervention took place to protect the workers' interest, which was felt very emergent and very obvious for that particular point of time. So what were the major changes or major developments which took place in this particular phase? Workers started to form their associations, which are basically voluntary associations, alternatively termed as trade unions, where they had a power where all the employees collectively went and asked for their rights to the management, which the management wouldn't deny. And this is all to do with the concept of collective bargaining and the concept of united we stand, divided we fall, right? So that is what happened here. And then Trade Union Act of 1926 was passed in India. And then the basic philosophy was to safeguard workers' interest and to sort out their problems. So what were the seen problems in the previous phase, which was actually initiated, and then thereby as a consequence, now in this phase of evolution, we are trying to work on it. Okay, so what are those pressing issues or problems? Number one, child labor. Number two, long hours of work with poor pay. And the next is poor working conditions, where the basic necessaries or the basic infrastructure was not maintained. Okay, so the unions usually used certain ways like mechanisms or strategies in order to make sure that the management of the company accept to their requirements, okay, or request. What were those? Number one, they had to go for strikes, lockouts, giravos, and many more, which were done in order to make sure that their rights were being heard by the management, and such rights were being genuinely given to the employees and the workers. Okay, so here there were certain major activities or personal practices which actually took place in this particular phase of evolution, like collective bargaining, where all people together go and ask for a particular requirement or a request. Grievance redressal is nothing but it's like a mechanism whereby you try to find the best ways to find a solution to the grievances or felt needs of the employees. Arbitration is like the involvement of a third party who is called as an arbitrator, who will come to the company. He will sit and listen to the matter or the problem or the issue in hand. Accordingly, he will make the process more easy by hearing the matter from both the perspective. Both the perspective means there are two parties to any conflict or dispute, one being the accused and two being the victim. So technically speaking, the accused is going to be a person who is found guilty of doing something wrong, okay, which is nothing but the management or the company's management. The second is going to be the victim, who's nothing but the person who's suffering or suffered losses because of the wrongdoings and the actions of the accused, right? So when there is a problem or a conflict because of this kind of a situation, you cannot find a solution by yourself unless and until you have that ability to extend and appreciate, acknowledge, and come to a conclusion. So when you are not able to do this kind of a setup, then there is an obvious need that you need a third party involvement called as an arbitrator, who will come listen to the matter from both the sides, that is basically accused side and the victim side, and then he is going to make his own assessment analysis, and then he is going to make a judgment which is called as giving an award, and that award or judgment has to be mutually acceptable and cohesively understood and followed by both the parties to that particular dispute. or argument. Now that is also something which was evidently seen in this particular phase of evolution. Then the next is employee benefits programs. Is nothing but a lot of employee benefits programs, incentive schemes and policies were actually taken, did find their birth in this particular phase. Installation of rational wage structure is nothing but you must not have any discrimination in payment of wages. Everything, every money that you shell out in the form of payment of wages should be genuinely matching to the effort and performance contributed by that particular employee, and that is where bringing the concept of rational. Rational means something which should be more meaningful, practical, feasible, and more genuine in its application. And then the next phase of evolution is social responsibility era. Now this was basically initiated by a person called as Robert Owen, who was a British industrialist. Okay, so here he is the one who initially started with this concept of adopting humanistic and paternalistic approach, which is nothing but here you will have one person who assumes the role of a father. Okay, like how a father takes care of his children in a house, similarly this fellow took up the role of becoming a father for all the employees working for him or say working under him, and he came up with a lot of measures, lot of facilities which were given to these employees like a father figure. Okay, so coming back to the slide, it says he viewed that the social and economic environment influenced the physical, mental and psychological development of workers. Definitely yes, the social environment and the economic environment prevailing in that particular organization and the country on the whole can definitely have an impact on the physical well-being, the mental and emotional well-being, and the psychological development also of the workers, right? So what did we see in this particular era or this particular phase? The philosophies basically include a lot of things. Okay, number one, provision for reduced working hours were given. Housing facilities were being made available for the employees. Education of workers and their children was something which was very much needed for that particular point of time in those years, which was also given. He admired for giving human treatment for workers, which is nothing but he always wanted to make things in a very humanistic approach and not in a machine, or a very static approach or a machine oriented approach. Okay, so that is what was evident in that particular era. The next is scientific management era, wherein we talk about this person called as Frederick Winslow Taylor in the year that is in the 20th century, who basically came up with certain principles. Okay, which was evidently seen in as a HRM initiative or a practice in a lot of companies in this particular phase of evolution. First one is use of scientific methods in setting work standards. Yes, scientific methods, more measurable and precise methods were being used in order to measure the work standards of the people which have been taking place. Second is scientific selection and placement of workers which is best suited for the tasks. Also provision for training, which means you should have a systematic indicator or a particular pattern or a format using which you will be able to technically and more correctly select and place workers for the positions which are kept vacant in the companies. Apart from that, you must also instill in them some amount of training which is required for them to furthermore polish their skill set and become more polished and more clear in defining their role in the company, and the activities has to be done in a much more effective way. Then the next would be clear-cut division of work and responsibility between management and workers. Yes, it is more structured, isn't it? You need to know what should be the role, duties, obligations, responsibility of the management of the company, similarly to that of what should be the role, responsibility, obligations of the workers. And then harmonious relations and close cooperation with workers, which is also going to be very important, because you cannot always see they had a very scientific and a very technical way of doing things. That is what is being seen more evident in this particular phase of evolution, all thanks to this gentleman, Frederick Winslow Taylor. Fine. And his study focused physical characteristics of human body as it responds to routine and clearly defined jobs, which is nothing but we are talking about ergonomics, wherein we are talking about the concept of motion study, where the physical movement, bodily movement of different parts of the human body and how it is going to have an impact on completion of tasks on time. Fine. So here there are certain techniques in scientific management. This gentleman came up with certain techniques. What are those techniques? Time study, which was a study conducted in order to measure the time required for an average employee to complete a particular task or an activity assigned to him. Motion study is something wherein we discuss about the various body parts which are being used in order to accomplish a particular task which is assigned to the employee. The movement or the motion of the various parts of the body of these employees is something going to be understood here. And then standardization of tools, equipment and machinery and working conditions, which is nothing but we need to standardize the tools, equipments and machinery. Standardization of tools, equipments and machinery and working conditions, which is nothing but you must set a standard and make sure that you must have very good standard quality of tools and equipments and machinery which will be used in the production process, number one. And the working conditions should be also very standardized in terms of matching to the standards of international repute. Okay. And then incentive wage plans with differential piece rate of wages, which is nothing but differential piece rate system is basically one of the forms or kinds of calculating the wages to be paid for the employees. Okay. So piece rate system is nothing but for every unit of output that you produce, there will be a rate fixed. Okay. So let me say, in order to produce 1 unit, it costs 100 rupees. Okay. The rate fixed is 100 rupees. If I produced 5 units, then my total wage for that day is going to be 500 units. I mean 500 rupees, right? So 5 units into 100 rupees becomes 500 rupees. That is going to be your wages for that particular amount of work or piece of work done by you, right? So how much, the more you produce, the more money you get as a return or a reward for the contribution made by you in the form of your productivity. And then the next era is going to be human relations era, where there was special focus on certain aspects like the feelings, the attitude, and the needs of the workers as human beings. So what is it that we can see here is between 1925 and 1935, Hugo Munsterberg, a psychologist, suggested the use of psychology in selection, placement, testing, and training the employees in organization, which means the concept of psychology or psychological development of a person is something which has to be understood much predominantly over the other aspects which are being used by companies, right? So the psychological well-being, the state of mind, the mental mapping, the patterns of thinking, the cognitive ability of people, the ability of people to comprehend language and the skills to communicate, and they connect with their respective personalities, perceptions and attitudes. All of these things were given more importance in this particular phase of evolution. And here we could also see that when in this particular phase, a person called Elton Mayo conducted a series of experiments at the Hawthorne plant of Western Electric Company in USA. If you remember, we have already studied these things where we have discussed about Hawthorne studies, isn't it? We have discussed a theory or a model under this, right? So what were the main findings? Number one, physical environment should be good, wherein basic physical infrastructure should be given to the employees with good condition. Second, favorable attitudes of workers and work team towards their work is very, very important. The attitude that matters is the attitude which has to be more favorable, more conducive, and it should be more holistic and more friendly. Fulfillment of workers' social and psychological needs is very, very important. If people are not feeling that their social demands and psychological needs are being met, it means that there is a gap. And if you don't bridge the gap, that can lead to a lot of problem tomorrow, where people cannot give you the result that you expect from them, right? And then workers can be motivated through job security, right to express their opinion on matters related to them. Yes, you have to give them that scope, that avenue where these people should be provided with basic security of job, right? And then they should also be given the platform where they can freely express what they feel about with respect to whatever's happening within the company. Sometimes it can be beyond the company also, because your individual personality and the psychological psychological aspects can actually have an impact on your productivity and the relationship that you hold with people in the organization, right? So it's not what's happening in the company, it's also what's happening in other aspects and other areas which has an impact on the psychology of the people, which can have an effect on the as a consequence on the work also. Fine. And then we go to the next phase of evolution, that is behavioral science era, where we started giving more importance not to the psychology but to the behavior of people and how people react and interact in a work environment or in a social setup, in other words, right? It was concerned with social and psychological aspects of human behavior. Some of the important elements in this particular era where individual behavior is linked with group behavior, definitely yes, we're talking about group dynamics here with respect to intra and interpersonal linkages, right? Second, informal leadership rather than formal leadership is very, very important, because you need to have that understanding and that rapport. Only then you'll be able to get your tasks done well, right? And then motivation by self-control and self-development is very, very important, because people should be taught to know and to know how to control their self themselves in terms of their emotions, their thought process, their actions and behavioral choices. And also they should be motivated to go for self-developmental programs and activities, or those activities which can help them shape and mold themselves in a much better way, personally, psychologically, physically, and more strategically also. Improving efficiency through self-operating is nothing but how can you do things much better by taking care of your own requirements and accordingly converting your own skills into actions, and that is how you will be able to reach the efficiency level. We are talking about self-actualization needs, which can be drawn from Maslow's theory, isn't it? Then the next is systems approach era, where we talk about three major systems which have been given to us, right? First is technical subsystem, where we talk about the technicalities involved in the work environment or the work culture or atmosphere, like formal relationship that takes place between employees, employers, and that of the management members, right? Social subsystem is basically a concept wherein we are discussing about the informal group relations, which is going to be obvious and required for you to chill out and for you to feel more comfortable and easy to work in an organizational context, right? And then power subsystem, where we are discussing about what is the concept of power, how do we exercise the power in order to get our things done. Okay, you cannot misuse power. If you misuse power, that becomes politics, isn't it? If you try to use power judiciously, then that is something which will help you find success in the long run. So you must always do things, use your power for the betterment of the mass and not for your self serving purposes, right? And then contingency approach era is basically this is going to be an era where we are talking about the various aspects like situational factors which can have an impact on the company and the various activities taken by the company. So here it is not the psychology, it is not the behavior, it is not the action. It is all to do with the situation, and according to the situation, you will have to make sure that you change and modulate yourself so that you're able to connect with people and you will be able to bring out good results in the long run, right? So that is what you need to understand under the contingency approach, that people don't matter, processes don't matter, money doesn't matter, rules and regulation that doesn't matter, but the situation in which all of these activities take place matters the most. Okay, so by this we are done with the evolution of human resource management, and now we will move on to the next topic, that is HR metrics. Now what is HR metrics? HR metrics is nothing but the ways in which companies convert qualitative data into quantitative data. It is nothing but how you're able to convert certain factors which can be measured numerically so that you will be able to take up good decisions about them. For examples, you can talk about certain examples here, like time to hire, cost per hire, early turnover, time since last promotion. So these are all things wherein you're trying to convert everything in a very quantitative or a numerical way so that it facilitates you in making effective decisions for the betterment of the company. Okay, so students, For today's class, we will stop it here in HR Metrics. The next class, I'll be giving you some more explanation on some more topics which will be a part of the first module. Hope students that you have understood well. If you have any doubts, please let me know. I'll be there to clarify. And please find the PDF document where you will find notes as well as concepts and explanation regarding the HRM in Indian and global context, and also start studying. Okay. Thank you, students.